St. Paul, in writing to the Philippians, says that and encourages them to discern what is of value. Discern what is of value. I'd love to take that phrase and just reflect about that a little bit tonight, because I think it has a lot to do with what we are asked to do during the season of Advent, to discern what is of value. Now, first of all, just taking the first word, discern, I think that, at least for me, given my background, has a lot of depth of meaning to it. Discernment is the same word that we use for a person who comes forward and says and offers himself as a candidate for the priesthood for an archdiocese or a religious order. So when you go around and all of your friends ask you what you're doing for about 6 years of your life, why aren't you married like the rest of us, or those sorts of things, you say, I'm in discernment. And that's what that's the official word for what we say we're doing. We're discerning the priesthood. Discerning the priesthood. And so I think that word discernment, when St. Paul says discern what is of value, I think a couple of thoughts come to mind when I think of the word discernment. For us to sit around and figure out of all the things that we have, the infinite number of things that we can do with our moment, our time, our hour that we have, whatever it is, with all the infinite number of things that we can do, we are asked to discern what of all of that is of value. And with regards then to discernment, a couple of thoughts from discerning priesthood that might help us also, and help me at least, kind of recognize what St. Paul is asking us to do out of love. First of all, when you think of the word discernment, I think St. Paul, a thought that we might have, that I have, is that discerning something is hard. It's not easy. If it was easy, St. Paul would not focus on that and would not encourage the Philippians to do it. He probably wouldn't spend time asking them to do things that were easy or obvious. And so we have to be reminded, the Philippians had to be reminded by St. Paul, and I think we then also are in that same boat. We need to be reminded, it's hard to figure out what is of value. When I look at the infinite number of things that I can do with my moment in my life, or my hour, or my 10 minutes that I have tonight or whatever, when I think of the infinite number of things that I can do, it's not readily apparent that some of them are more valuable than others. It all kind of seems like a smorgasbord of things that I can do. And they all seem about the same. They all look about the same. Go to Mass, go to the movies, go to the restaurant, go to this, go to that tonight. I got an infinite number of things. Christmas parties, television, internet, whatever. It all just kind of, everything's like an option. There's all these different doors that I can walk through, and they all seem about the same. It's hard to discern what is of value and what is not of value. It's hard to figure that out. That's why St. Paul is saying that. Just like it was hard, I think, it was a lot of work involved in discerning the priesthood. The second thing I think that relates to that word discernment for us is that it takes time. It's not something that we instantly do. Discernment implies that it's not just something that we just, oh, okay, yeah, that's right, it becomes obvious what's of value. No, it takes time to develop that skill of figuring out what it is that has value. It took us, for the seminary, you're on anywhere between about a 6 and a 10-year process. After college, 6 years. It takes time to listen to and discern and recognize and listen. Is God calling me to this? Is He calling me to something else? It's all of those things. It takes time, and it's a long process. And in the same way for us, looking at all the options that I have in my life and what I can do with my moment, it takes time to develop the skill of seeing, in fact, no, they're not all the same. All the things that I can do tonight with my life, they're not all of equal value. And in fact, some of them have eternal weight, and others are basically very thin and surface level. And so again, it's a process that takes time. St. Paul doesn't say, hey, turn on the switch, it's so obvious, recognize what has value. He says, discern what has value. There's a beautiful recognition by St. Paul that this isn't some skill that we develop, in the matter of a few days. It takes time, and it's a process. The word discernment, too, means to decide and to separate. So again, taking all these things that I can do with my moment and my time and my life, it means deciding and separating them out. Which ones belong to which piles? There's the no value pile, and then there's the decently valued pile, and then there's the eternal importance pile. And so learning to separate them out is an important skill as well. That's what the word discernment means. Another lesson that I learned from discerning the priesthood is that discernment is best done, or at least partly done, not always, not all the time, but a key component to discernment is silent prayer. Spending time in silent prayer. In fact, you may or may not know, I spent 2 years at St. Meinrad, and then I was supposed to spend 4 years studying after that in Rome for the priesthood. And I made it 6 months in Rome before I called Archbishop Beeklein and said, I can't do this here. I need to be back at St. Meinrad. And Rome was great. It was awesome. The Pope, everything, right? There was like 500 churches that were just these amazing things, and music and culture, all that. I loved all that. Great guys. But for me, it was so loud. We lived in the heart of downtown Rome, and it was trying to study and pray and discern. And in the midst of all that, it was just too difficult. And I needed that time. I knew, because I had experienced it for 2 years, the silence and the quiet of St. Meinrad. I knew that I needed that. Maybe because maybe it was a weakness, but I knew that I needed that time and that place in order to achieve and find that silence where I could enter into that prayer. And so for us, who St. Paul is tasking with this importance of discerning what has value, the best way that you're going to do that is spending time regularly in silent prayer. That's where we're going to be able to be at our best in terms of being able to discern and figure out what of my options has value and what is paper thin and ephemeral and passing. And then that second part, finally, he says also, of course, the whole phrase, discern what has value. Again, that implication is that some things don't have value and that there's a sliding scale, right? That's a beautiful admittance of St. Paul's. There's a scale there in which, again, some events are kind of important, some have none, some are sinful, and actually harm us, and then other things have great importance. And so we pray for the strength to be able to discern what has value, to spend the time, to put in the work, to recognize that it takes a while to figure that out, that it's a process that we'll spend all of our lives refining and working on, that it's best done in prayer. And so again, as our society is telling us, ramp up, go faster, buy stuff that's crazy, Christmas, everybody's screaming and yelling, may we enter into the season of Advent and be able to look at our lives and discern which of the things in our lives have the deepest and most eternal value to them. And then once we've discerned that, may we then spend our time working and attaining and achieving and spending our efforts on those things that have that eternal and infinite value.